life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk. Well, hello. You've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk. This is a television series with an essay format, and we're especially pleased this evening to have so many friends with us, and so glad to have you aboard. I'll tell you what we're going to talk about tonight, something that I'm sure people have pondered over for centuries. Why is it that some people work so hard and so long and never seem to have anything? Surely you've noticed. Other people, on the other hand, hardly seem to work at all and get it all. Why is it that some people enter a new environment, perhaps it's a new job or a new club, and boy, they're ecstatic. They found their place in the sun and they know this is where they should be, and yet in a matter of weeks, perhaps months, things are stagnant, they haven't established anything, and they're moving on to something else. Relationships go that way too sometimes. People meet, enjoy, appreciate, find themselves in each other, and yet something happens somewhere down the line and it just seems to go bad. People have wondered about this for a long time, and whenever I see that happening or hear the questions addressed, my mind rushes back over the years to the spring of 1938, quite a while ago. And that was the year that my father bought a White Mountain, New Hampshire farm for $1. That's a pretty good deal. Obviously, there was a connection there somewhere. But he bought it from my grandfather, who in turn had inherited it from my great-grandfather, a man named Savage, who had homesteaded this property up in the White Mountains and had built this home and what have you, and then had dissipated into the forest, leaving his wife Anna to care for things, along with a hired hand we used to call Uncle Henny. That was the way he lived. He would appear maybe 2 or 3 times a year. He would have ginseng that he'd harvested from the forest that he would barter for the staples, be around for a few days, and then he'd be gone again. Well, Grandpa Savage and Annie aged, tired, sickened, and died, and left the farm to my grandfather, who had no intention of going up there, and so he sold it to my dad for $1. You can imagine our excitement, moving there, the idea of renovating, breathing new life into this place, and it was beautiful. I'd like to take a moment to describe it if I can, because it's going to come up again and again. It was on Route 1, Campton, New Hampshire. That was a gravel road that wound up through the mountains connecting the various properties. And when you stood on the road and looked at our farm, there was a double entry driveway. It formed a triangular grassy spot there. And that driveway wound approximately 60 yards up to a 1.5-story white clapboarded farmhouse. Very typical of that part of the country. Adjacent to that, and right beside it, was a 1-story brown garage-like structure, and attached to that was a sizable red barn. Again, typically New England. The front yard was shaded by a huge, perfectly shaped maple tree. Underneath that was a seat swing, a glider that we could sit in and watch traffic as it went by. That was the novelty of the day. If you kind of went over to the right and looked, you saw the beginning of the family farm. In other words, at least the garden, where the corn and potatoes and peas and carrots, we had it all there, rhubarb. And the idea was to live off that during the summer and have enough left over in the fall for canning and food preparation for the winter. Behind that was most of the remaining portion of the 200 acres, really fine timberland. The property was peppered here and there with hayfields. And all over the property, brooks springs bubbled up out of the ground. I remember as a boy laying on the ground and drinking right out of the springs, pure cold water. It was magnificent. Those formed little brooks that became raging more or less as they wound its way to the Pemberjewasset River. It was stocked too. We used to fish it occasionally. Along those brooks were these green, grassy, knoll, sort of mossy places that I would lay by the hour with my dog Sugar and watch cloud formations and think about stuff and wonder and ponder. It's great. Over to the left, there was about 2.5 acres of strawberries. And on that piece of property, there was a guest house. And the property, by the way, had some fine timber. And the idea was to go in there and selectively cut out the big timber, haul it off to the sawmill to supplement our income in order to make room for the small timber to grow in a healthy way. It just has to be done that way. I enjoyed it all. Enjoyed working in the woods with my dad, enjoyed the gardening and the household chores. Everything was fine. The strawberry patch was tough. All ground level plants, backbreaking to work out, and we'd spend hours out there grooming and tilling the soil and what have you. But they bore fruit. Come around July, they began to, be healthy, boy. And we were eating strawberries. We had strawberry shortcake, and we had strawberry pie and strawberry cake and strawberry ice cream. And my mother tried baking strawberries, and she tried to fry a few. And what do you do with all these strawberries? And so we finally decided to pick them and pack them in pint, quart, and peck boxes. And my dad built a little roadside stand, and we'd sold strawberries by side the road. You've seen that done. Didn't work out very well, though, because either there was no traffic, and it consumed our attention unnecessarily, or there was too much traffic, and it was bothersome. People would get out of the car and move around, a horn would toot and what have you, and that would disturb George Ward's horses that were pastured right across the road, on his property. And so my dad finally threw his hands up and says, I'm not going to do this anymore. And so I remember the day, too, that there was the sign, this nice, professionally done sign, said Strawberry Knoll Farm. And we planted it in that little triangular grassy spot, and that's how we were identified from that point on. Adjacent to that was a little sign that says, buy empty boxes and pick your own. In other words, we sold empty boxes, and they could go out there and pick their own. That didn't work out very well either, because people would step on the plants, they would steal a sprig, they'd eat more than they put in the box, and my dad wasn't too pleased with that. So we did finally succumb to the idea of crating the strawberries. Actually, we'd pick them and pack them in these pint, quart, and peck boxes, and then crate them. And these produce trucks from Plymouth, New Hampshire, it was a community about 60 miles away, would send these produce trucks up and gather, fruits and vegetables from the farmers and take it back to the store. So that's pretty exciting. You can imagine my excitement, little boy, first day of the supermarket. Truck pulled up in front and jumped out and ran through the store. And I was going to announce to the world that those indeed were our strawberries. And I'll never forget, I got to the counter, and there they were, and I was about to make my announcement, and there was a couple ladies there. One was reaching out to buy a box, and the other woman reached over and put her hand on her arm and said, just a minute, I bought some here last week, and when I got them home and tipped them out on the counter, and the bottom there's all these small, bruised, half-spoiled berries. And so I decided I'd get my berries somewhere else. And the lady said, well, I guess you're right. And she passed. And that hurt a lot. And I kind of ran through the store, great big lump in my throat, pressing tears out of my eyes. Told my daddy what had happened. And he said, well, people got to complain about something. So he handled that. But somehow he saw that hadn't handled it for me. And he knelt down. And I thought for a minute that he was going to hug me or touch me. He never did. He died before he could. He was a non-demonstrative, non-expressive man. In fact, this is probably a highlight moment in communication with him. He looked at me in the eye and said, there now, funny face. You know we don't pack them that way. So I handled it. You know how you suck it up and, boy, you just handle it. And I knew that's all that I was going to get from Daddy. The pain come bubbling up again a few days later when we were packing berries, and I saw him very purposely placing little berries on top of the boxes. See, he'd been hurt too, but he handled it in a different way. We'd go back to the store throughout the summer, and frankly, the exuberance was gone, the excitement, the energy had diminished. I'd saunter by and take a look at the berries, and the little berries were never there to see. There's always the big, ripe, red, rosy berries right there on top of those boxes. And I didn't say anything to anybody about it, but I wondered about it, I pondered over it, I troubled about it. I mean, there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't spend some time trying to figure that out. Felt something was amiss, something was up. It impinged upon my first summer there, no question. That fall, we were sitting out underneath that maple tree doing chores. On the seat swing, and I was sitting on a little chair beside, and I had a big basket of beans there. My job was to shell those beans and to put them in this jar. And my dad was sitting over there on the left, and he was husking and silking corn. We were going to put the beans and the corn together to make what? Succotash. Yeah, and you can imagine how good that was right out of the garden. There was going to be enough left over for canning, and my mother had bought some walnuts, and didn't grow good ones up there, and she was breaking them open and taking the meat out and was going to combine it with mincemeat, or in mincemeat, along with venison that we'd been given by a local farmer. You can imagine how good that would be. And she was being assisted, by a young friend of mine named Arthur Boyce. And Arthur was a flighty kind of a kid, never took anything too serious. He was ill-kept and not a very good student. Well, to be perfectly honest, he was failing everything, he was dirty, and he was a rascal. But anyway, he was the only kid on the mountain, and he was my buddy. I mean, we hung out together. And he was supposed to be helping, but really what he was doing was juggling the walnuts, and he'd play Aggies with them, and then once in a while when you break one open, what would he do? He'd eat it, And my father would never say anything to him, nor my mother, but I knew they'd really rather Arthur get busy. Be with that about this. So I would do anything I could to align myself with my dad, especially, and I got this idea. If I could distract Arthur for a moment, or if he turned away just for a second, I'd grab one of the walnuts and hide it in the beans. And I would do that, and he'd kind of give it this bit, probably knowing all along what I was doing, but that kind of tickled Mom and Pop, and And after a period of time, I managed to get 1, 2, 3 beans into this, 3 walnuts into those beans. Kind of got through. And there was some pods and some stems, and I was picking them out, and there's always a broken bean or two. And I don't know why we do these things, but there was a moment when I picked this pan up. It was a tin pan, not at all like this. But I picked that pan up, and I kind of shook it, and I noticed a walnut, and I pushed it down before Arthur could see it. And I continued, and there's another. There's 2. And something went on inside of me, a light. And I was goosebumps all over. I have them now. And I pushed those walnuts down, and I didn't care whether Arthur saw or not. I wanted my daddy to see. Look, Daddy, look at this. 1, 2, 3. Wow. Everything was all okay for the summer. You understand? See, no one had repacked those strawberries. No one had tried to cheat a housewife or whatever. That just happens that way. It didn't take me but a few hours to search out and find that that's called stratification. In other words, there's a law that was at work here. And it's not a suggestion, by the way, it's a law. Law of stratification. It's like gravity and cause and effect, an equal and opposite reaction. It's going to happen every single time. And the law says this, that when there are comparable elements in an environment, now comparable elements would be all solids, all liquids, all gases. But when there's comparable elements in an environment, and there's volatility, if there's any movement at all, that sooner or later, the larger objects will appear at the outside. Now, it's not the top, really, because we live on a sphere. See, that's another kind of semantical faux pas that we live with. We say up and down, but we really mean out and in. Follow? Okay. So, anyway, this is the law. And so what was happening is that as those crates were being jostled and handled and bounced over the highway and over bridges and what have you, that this shifting was taking place. And so by the time they got there, why the little berries my dad had put on the top had somehow managed to find themselves to the bottom, and of course were terribly bruised by it and shattered. So everything was okay about that. And I became conscious of this. It's done in the woods. It was another example. They cut out these timbers, and of course you had to take small timber along with it occasionally. And they'd fall these trees, and we'd top them off and what have you. And they had these beautiful, magnificent teams of horses that they call it twitch. the logs across the forest floor and bring them to a skidway. And we would kind of load that skidway up with these logs. Then lumber trucks would pull in, and we would lay down planks and use big PV hooks and roll this big timber up on the truck. And then usually we'd top the load off with several small logs, throw chains over at least 3 sections of it, cinch down tight, and they'd take off with the sawmill. Well, it was traditional that they had to keep stopping those trucks because those loads would work loose. And so they'd re-cinch the load and tighten it up and, go on and maybe stop again 2-3 times to the sawmill. So one day I'm down there and I'm noticing this, and I say, you guys are loading the trucks wrong. And you can imagine how these lumberjacks handle that. This 9-year-old kids, hey, yeah, I'll get the kid, Yeah. And I said, no, really. If you took a little extra trouble here and put the little logs on first, and then the big timbers, it would go all the way to the sawmill. You wouldn't have to stop the truck. One day they humored me. One day they kind of tried it out, and the truck took off, and it was kind of a topic of discussion, wondering what was going to happen. Well, drivers finally came back, and they asked them, and they said, you have to stop the truck? They said, oh, yeah, we stopped the truck. Didn't have to, though. Load carried fine. But they were most excited about one thing. The little logs didn't get scun up. You call it scun up. It's kind of cute. Yeah, see, that shifting had sometimes ruined some of the small timber. You see? Kind of fascinating. And I can go on and on with this. It wasn't until years later. Now, this had an impact, I'm certain, because the way things went in school and the military for me. And then in 1955, I got into creative direct selling. It's a very volatile environment where people are challenged every moment of the day. A lot of so-called rejection, and the environment is fraught with fruitlessness and seeming failure. And all of a sudden, I began to realize the same thing was happening there. And all around in our socioeconomic environment. Same thing. In other words, if you could anthropomorphize the objects in the jar, give them a life and a voice and what have you, and listen very carefully, you could hear a little voice down here saying, give me a break. I'm so weak and low down, I've never had a chance. Never had a chance. I was born the wrong color, born the wrong sex, born the wrong side of the track. My daddy never hugged me. You know what I mean? In other words, give me a break. Put me up with the big guys and I'll show you what I can do. We all feel somehow, I'll tell you another way it's said too. Well, I'll tell you, if I was running this company, it'd be different. You know that feeling? We could handle the mountain if we could just get over the dead-gum hills. Yeah. A little fella says, put me up there with you. I've lived in an environment where literally we have selected, recruited, accepted, thousands of people. And said, okay, bud, there you are. Took away all the barriers. No glass ceilings anymore. Limitless opportunity. And yet time, tumult, and trouble. The little fella ended right back up here, down here again. And then the next thing you hear, if you listen carefully, is, well, hey, I wasn't cut out for that. That was a scam anyway. They shame the dream. And they say, but the fact of the matter is that if this was the hand that I got dealt out of the deck of life, I'll deal with it. I'll make it. Mom always told me anyway, be satisfied with what I had instead of wanting so much. Anybody ever heard that one? Yeah. But I'll tell you, it's not fair. Spread it around a little bit, even the playing field. That's not right. I mean, why should this guy, have the big car, and why should she have those beautiful clothes and a nice home, and this kid be able to go to private school, and they could scoot off to, Acapulco in the winter and get away from the damp and the cold, and maybe skip up to Canada during the summer and get away from the heat. Spread it around. And besides, put that big guy down here with me and we'll see how smart he is. And I've lived in a place, this has happened to me twice, I've seen it happen to a lot of people, that a stroke of a legislative pen, a noble but apparently unwise decision, a choice that someone else made perhaps, and wow, jam right to the bottom. And boy, it's painful. Lose everything. Lose it all. And you shake your head, and there's a tendency to say, why me? Why me? What did I do? I don't deserve this. And I'll tell you, I've seen it where it happens and it's hard to get started again. Something in that subconscious mind that goes, see, I told you. Wasn't worth the effort. But once in a while, once in a great while, there's some character, there's some stature, there's some dream, a mission, a purpose, something where after a time of recuperation and getting through some of the processes and what have you, where there's a tentative movement, slow at first, maybe accelerates, maybe gets recommitted, dedicated, accelerates the energy. There it is, right back up at the top again. It's going to happen time and time again. It's a law. You have to be careful of this stuff, though. You have to be careful because it's so easy to misinterpret what's happening here. For example, there's been a book written by this title that work hard and pay the price, dog eat dog, take care of number one. If you don't, no one else is going to, work hard, sacrifice, and someday you will make it to the top. You ever hear that one? Yeah. Well, that's not what's happening in here. It's not what's happening. If that were true, those walnuts would have to have hands to grasp with, arms to pull with, or legs to push with, or at least a mind with which to manipulate. Doesn't have any of that. Doesn't have any of that. It's just a walnut. Just a walnut. And yet, every time that we put those walnuts on the bottom, provide some volatility and some movement, they will emerge at the top. 100%. In other words, but they're not making it to the top. So in other words, that's a semantical faux pas again. What's really happening here, according to the law of stratification, is that when you put comparable elements in an environment and apply volatility, or if there's going to be any movements, what really happens is the little objects crowd in and around and underneath the larger objects and displace themselves or actually elevate the walnut to the top. See, that walnut's floating. No effort at all. If there's any effort, any damage, any abuse, who's experiencing it? The beans. As evidenced by, if you go down, for example, every city has its place where you can go and see the homeless, those people who've been ground down, their edges are dulled. Well, you can see the spoilage, the pain, the hurt, the bruising. You don't find it in other parts of the town. This is what's happening. So it's not about sacrifice and pay the price and what have you, nearly as much as we've been led to believe. There's another dimension here, another dimension, and it's about having stature. You've got to capture the stature. That seems to be the key. I'm going to see how far we can get with that this show. We're going to do it this way. I'm going to create an environment. This could be a family. It could be a club, an organization, a job, or a business. It could be a church. It could be a community. It could be a city. It could be a state. It could be a nation, or it could be the world. Doesn't make any difference. And all around us, including ourselves, there are capacities. There's capacity here, and yet there is an object that cannot fulfill its purpose. In other words, whether it was God or man that made this, there was a purpose for it, an intention that cannot be fulfilled in its present state. It does not make it worthless, however. It would be unkind to say that. I mean, this object could be used as a bookmark or a doorstop or, an object to art, I suppose, if you didn't have anything else. I've seen some with advertising written on them and passed out like business cards. But there's capacity here. In order for it to fulfill itself, it has to get exposed to the appropriate environment. And so it goes over here, and typically in our society, what we tend to do is that when we get challenged, we get an opportunity, we get a chance, we kind of take a jaundiced look at it, a careful look. We might even stick our big toe in a little bit just to test the water to see how it goes. And when we do, something always happens. There is an absorption and assimilation and accumulation of what's in that environment, always. However, if we don't get involved, even though we're closer to our purpose, you can now use this as a sponge, but it does look a little silly. You'd think that was handy, but I think it's more silly. Certainly incomplete, certainly incomplete. And the only way that that's going to fulfill itself is to get off the edge. And that was to sever at least temporary bonds to the past. Now just step forward, kind of like Cortez did when he brought the ships across. And wasn't it Cortez that burned the ships, said, we're not going back, we're going forward. This is what we're going to do. Notice what happens here. Full absorption, and now able to fulfill its purpose fully. Trouble of it is, that's all that's going to happen. That's all that's going to happen. That sponge is as big as it's going to get. It's assimilated all the water that it's going to. Anything that happens now is going to be evaporation, perhaps. Okay? There has to be something else that occurs. Now, rather than going too far into it, this particular show, I'm going to invite you to come back next week, and we're going to continue with this. There are some very definite steps which are manageable, certainly comparable, that can make all the difference in the world. I have one young man in my life who is incredibly successful. I took him off the street when he was 16 years old. He was a street kid, ran away from home and quit school, and today he's worth $32 million. Never completed high school. So come back next week and we'll explain how he did that and how a lot of others have accomplished much the same thing and how you could do precisely the same thing and accomplish the same thing. This has been Life Talk. I'm going to go ahead and put this up. And if some of you would like to come and see a live essay, just call us at 916-366-8749. And we'll be happy to visit with you on the phone, and we'll send you a couple of tickets and hope to meet you in person as we have these people. But other than that, thank you, and we'll see you next week. And by the way, don't tune in at the same time. Half hour earlier. You got to tune in a half hour earlier. You understand what I'm... Bye-bye.